Oh, okay. What's your name?
My name is Johnny.
What's your question?
My question is, have you ever ridden in a limo? Because I've ridden in a limo at school.
Have you ever ridden in a limo?
Yeah, I live in a limo, pretty much. Yeah, limos are kind of gone now, and now it's SUVs. You get picked up in these super SUVs. But I kind of missed the long stretch limos. It was sort of like going to the prom, with your band. Actually, I never went to the prom. I was always in the band that played at the prom. But I would like to do a live album back at my high school, Alice Cooper Live at the Prom. I think it's a great idea.
I think you should.
Yeah. There wouldn't be a lot of dancing going on, I don't think.
And we'll all buy it. That was a great question, and you look amazing.
Thank you.
What's your name?
I'm Lisa. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Hollywood vampires and how you met Johnny Depp.
Okay. I was doing Dark Shadows with Johnny Depp in London, and we just started talking about the drinking club we had called the Hollywood Vampires. And it was John Lennon and Keith Moon and Harry Nilsson and, all these rock guys that met every night at the Rainbow and drank. And, 9/10 of them were dead from just that. And I was about the only one left. Me and Bernie Taupin and Mickey Dolenz were the only ones that were left out of the vampires. And so we started talking about the idea. First of all, Johnny was a guitar player way before he was an actor, a really good guitar player. And I said, we should put a little band together and just kind of honor all of our dead drunk friends. And so we did. And Joe Perry just happened to walk in right then, and he goes, I'm in.
Wow.
So there we had two guitar players then and a lead singer. Duff McKagan then from Guns N' Roses, I'm in. And pretty soon we had the band. Now we were only going to be a bar band. We were just going to play bars and play, covers of all the guys that died that we used to drink with. We might have gotten high with them too, but it was in the 60s, late 60s. But it ended up we played the Rainbow. Yeah, not the Rainbow, the one next door, the Roxy, for 100 people. And that's all we were going to do. The very next show we did was Rock in Rio, 150,000 people. So we ended up being now a touring band. Now I'm in two bands. But I just talked to Johnny last night. He was in France, and we're doing a show in Phoenix on the 8th, December 8th, a charity show. So it's fun. Johnny's great. He's a great guitar player, though. Really good guitar player. And all the stuff you've heard about him, weighing 118 pounds and being drunk all the time, and that's all absolutely bull. I just did a whole tour with him. I've never seen him in better shape. Yeah.
What's your name?
Soren. He knows that. So my question to you is, what is your opinion on the current state of rock music, and what advice do you have for younger people who want to start a rock band?
Well, what is called rock music isn't rock music. Let's take all of the what I call modern music out of it. What you basically hear on the radio is modern music. The Foo Fighters are rock, okay? Green Day is rock. Bands like that are rock and roll bands. But you can't say Beyonce is rock and roll. You can't say that Jay-Z is rock and roll. It's just not rock and roll. And that's not picking on them. What they do is great. But it's just not, you can't put them in the same category as The Who. That doesn't make any sense. So I kind of defend rock on a level of, is it outlaw? Is rock and roll truly outlaw? I'm hoping that more bands are in garages right now learning Guns N' Roses songs and Aerosmith songs and Alice Cooper songs, young bands, because that's hard rock. There's a couple of really good, the Struts are great, the Stripes are great. There's some really good young rock bands out there, but I'd like to see a lot more.
And I think the second half of your question was, what advice would you give to people that wanted to start a band?
What's that?
What advice would you give to people that want to start a band?
Well, like anything else, if you can be original, be original. I was in an era where they wanted you to be original. They did not want you to sound like everybody else. They didn't want you to look like everybody else. I mean, we came out, and then Bowie came out. But Bowie was doing this whole space thing with his character. So it wasn't like Alice Cooper. Kiss came 7 years later, and they were doing something different than what I was doing. The record companies wanted individuality at that point. When a band walked in the room, you wanted to know who they were. They had identity. And I don't see that going on right now. It seems like all bands want to look alike, which I don't get. I think the last band that really had a personality was the Brides. The Black Veil Brides had a personality. When they walked in a room, you knew that it wasn't some other band. So if I were going to be in a band right now, a young band, I would severely do hard rock and definitely get a look, something that puts you apart from everybody else.
Well, from watching the documentary Supermensch, I remember, I think the story was that you guys were wearing like plastic see-through outfits, and
Yes.
somebody had to call the cops on you guys?
Well, we decided that the only way that we were going to get publicity was to get arrested. So my manager had clear plastic suits made with nothing underneath. So we went on stage, and of course it's hot on stage, and they steam up. So you can't see anything because it's all steamed up. We couldn't get arrested because and that was really, it backfired on our face, but the story was even funnier, the fact that we couldn't get arrested at that point.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Chuck. Both of the Welcome to My Nightmare albums were so incredibly written and produced. Have you ever envisioned putting them to a screenplay, bringing them to Broadway?
I think that Welcome to My Nightmare, Part 1, the first one, is already a Broadway show. I would love to have some producer come in and say, I want to produce this on Broadway, let's go. There's talk about it now, They say, well, let's do a Broadway show, and since Springsteen's on Broadway now, well, Alice Cooper show's already a Broadway show. And I said, well, yeah, all you have to do is just put it on the stage, and that's what it is. So when somebody comes along and says, yeah, we want to produce that show, I think that a lot of that came also from Jesus Christ Superstar, from Herod playing Herod. They saw the character, and when they wanted me to play Herod, I said, well, Herod was an egotistical, arrogant king. And underneath, he was terrified of Jesus, because his whole life he was terrified of Jesus. So I said, I'm going to play this character very much like I play Alice Cooper, because Alice is this arrogant villain, And I said, he needs to be very condescending, And so they let me play it that way, and I think it worked pretty good.
Yeah, I watched it. It was amazing.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
What's your name?
My name is Michelle, and my question is, for someone who handles snakes and has his own head chopped off and other people have to kiss it, what scares Alice?
If you've noticed, I do not have any tattoos. I am needle phobic, totally needle phobic. I could put my head in a guillotine, no problem. Wood chipper, go ahead, whatever it is. Blood test, pass right out, And it has nothing to do with the pain. It has nothing to do with the blood. It's the idea of a needle going in your vein makes me go, And that's weird, because it shouldn't bother me one bit. But I could never get tattoos. I could never be a junkie either. That's the good news.
Thank you.
The tattoos are worth it. Yeah. What's your name?
My name's Tyler. I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan of you coming out and talking about your faith. So I was wondering, what's your favorite Bible verse and why?
Well, first of all, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor. My grandfather was an evangelist. And I was the prodigal son. I grew up in the church, went as far away as you could get, and then came back. Because once I got sober, I started realizing what was important to me. And I think that what people would say, I even said this. When I became Christian, went to my pastor, and I said, I don't think I can be Alice Cooper anymore. And he says, why? He says, does God make mistakes? And I went, no. And he says, well, look where he put you. He says, why can't you be a rock star and be Alice Cooper and still follow Christ? And I went, well, that's right. I think that he gave you talent and says, go be talented. Go do what you do, but follow me. My lifestyle is certainly not what it used to be. I've been married 43 years now, and never cheated on my wife. I can see a lot of guys out there going. And, we have a very happy marriage. Our kids are great. Our kids are all Christian. But 2 of my kids are in bands. Dash is in co-op. And Calico sings for Bisto Blanco. So I've got, everybody's in show business in my family, but we're all Christians. So there is a different, some people have a very stereotypical look at what Christians are. And once you're a Christian, you can never make mistakes. That has nothing to do with being a Christian. That's when you do make mistakes. Except that you're forgiven. Galatians 2:20.
Cool. Thank you.
What's your name?
My name's Lucas Washington, and I recently started a rock band with my friends, and I was wondering if you had a good band name.
Oh my gosh, a great one. The Husky Baby Sandwich. We were going to use it, and the record company said no. Even Frank Zappa said no.
Wow.
The Husky Baby Sandwich. Great name.
That's definitely interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody's used it, so use it. We'll give it to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Brad. Longtime fan, Alice, probably 30 years or more
Thank you.
listening. And so I know you've worked with a lot of horror movie icons like Vincent Price and John Carpenter. I was just curious, who was the one that stood out the most to you, or what is your favorite horror movie?
My favorite horror movie will probably surprise you. Of course, The Exorcist is probably still the scariest movie of all time because it scares your soul more than your brain. There's something about it when you see that you can be possessed that makes all of us go, ooh, that could be me, And my favorite film, though, is probably Salem's Lot. And only because it was a made-for-TV movie. Toby Hooper directed it. The music was amazing in it. And Barlow was probably the best vampire I ever saw. Barlow they kept talking about Barlow, but they never showed you him. And then about 3/4 through the movie, his whole face comes up. And I went, like that, because I wasn't expecting it. And he was truly terrifying. But there's 6 or 7 scenes in that where the kids are floating outside, scraping on the windows, the guy in the rocking chair, teacher. There were some great scenes and some funny ones too. David Soul has got this lady that's dead behind him, and she's got a blanket over her. And all of a sudden he hears something behind him, and she starts moving. And he starts trying to say the Lord's Prayer, and he can't remember it. And he's trying to tape these 2 tongue depressors together to make a cross while she's getting up, and then finally she sits up. And it's a great scene. It's a really good scene. He puts the thing on her head, and it burns a cross in her head. There's so many great scenes. And the music in that is also unbelievably good. Great movie. If you haven't seen Salem's Lot with David Soul, it's worth seeing.
And reading as well.
Yeah.
The Stephen King group is great. Thank you, Alice.
Hi. You wrote a book in 1975 called Me, Alice.
Yes.
That's
great work of fiction.
It's sadly out of print. Have you ever thought about putting out a new version of it?
Most people that have that book stole it from the library because I don't really think we sold too many of them. And I might have been drinking at the time. In fact, I was. And when we were doing the book, I wasn't taking it very seriously. Stephen Gaines and I were writing it, and I was making things up as I went along. So very few things in that book are for real. Golf Monster is actually the real story. And Super Duper Alice Cooper, the documentary is absolutely on the money.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Is there a chance of another book?
What's that?
Is there a chance of another book?
Well, yeah, I would still write some stuff because we left that book left off at a certain time. The documentary ended when I got sober and came on stage for the first time. So since then, 1984 till now, there's a whole other book.
Awesome. What's your name?
Hi, my name's Kristen. If you can go back to any point in your career, what would it be and why?
I'll tell you what, there's a certain thing about bands, and my son's going through this right now. They're in a van, traveling across the country, pretty much sleeping in the van, and you always remember that, those days as being the good old days. They weren't. I remember we spent one Christmas Eve in Albuquerque in a Motel 6, all of us in one room, because we could only afford like a $6 room at that point. And we had decorated a tumbleweed with beer tabs. And we all sat around, going, wow, if we were home, we'd be presents and the food and everything. But we were so determined to make it, we couldn't put our tail between our legs and go home. So, those days were great, but they were not the good old days. I think going on stage for the first time sober was an interesting night because Guns N' Roses were opening for us, and I had never played Alice Cooper sober. So I put all the stuff on, got the makeup on, and walked around in a circle for about 2 hours, wondering if Alice was going to show up, because I had no idea. I'd always played him, with either whiskey or whatever was going on. So I got on stage that night, and I realized at that point that the old Alice was dead. The old Alice was a victim. He was sort of society's whipping boy. They hung him, they cut his head off. Everybody hated him. That was really the idea, that Alice was representing all of the outcasts. Now that I was sober, I went, I want this Alice to be a villain now. I want him to be a supervillain. I want him to not be like this. Now he was going to be like this. He was going to be Alan Rickman. Very, very condescending, and the audience, oh dear, the great unwashed, and the audience loved that character because he was a whole new Alice. They were expecting to see this kind of broken down alcoholic, and they got this new sleek version of Alice, and it was much more fun. I had a band that was very, very tight and very up. It said on the album, featuring no ballads. I didn't want anything to do with ballads. I wanted everything to be powerful and in your face. And that's basically, when that Alice was born. So that might have been the night that I remember more than anything else.
Thank you.
What's your name?
My name is Hunter, and I have 2 questions. The first one is, how do you get in the horror films? And the second one is, how did you find out about Metallica?
How do you get out of horror films is another good question. Horror films are great to do because I loved horror films all my life. I grew up in Detroit, and all the kids we would all go to the movies on Saturday, and we would see The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and It Came from Outer Space, and The Brain That Wouldn't Die. We would sit there all day watching these movies. So they became a big part of me and started coming out later on in my lyrics in the image of Alice. So, that was just a big part of me. And I didn't really hear the second part of the question.
How did you get into Metallica?
Metallica. The band Metallica.
Yes.
Yeah. Great guys. They're good guys. They're really good guys. A couple of them are actually from Arizona. Flotsam and Jetsam, I think, one of the guys was in. But I get along with those guys really well. Hatfield told me that their favorite album was Welcome to My Nightmare. So there was a connection there, and I think their guitar player is Kurt, collects a lot of horror memorabilia and has a great collection. By the way, the guy that has the best Star Wars collection in the world, Brian May from Queen, he has got stuff that was given to him, the original, Darth Vader costume, all of the original stuff he's got. So, I mean, his collection's got to be worth, $10 million.
All right, thank you.
So, out of curiosity, since you just mentioned Creature from the Black Lagoon, and obviously we come here for all of our different fandoms, and the Creature is here, like Riku. Have you had an opportunity to speak with him?
I haven't met him yet, but I'm definitely going to. I was about 6 years old, and my sister and I went to see the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And the one scene where he opens the tent and he takes the guy's face off with his, I jumped up and ran out of the theater. And that's the first time I ever did that. And so I always kind of look at that movie now as being one of my favorites. Because at the time, he wasn't Frankenstein, he wasn't Dracula. It was this thing with great big claws that could take your face off. And both of us ran out of the theater. It was great. That's what a movie should do, by the way.
Right. What's your name?
Blake. And I was wondering about how you got involved with WrestleMania.
With?
WrestleMania.
Oh, it was, first of all, the WrestleMania 3 was in Detroit, and that was hometown for me. And it was sort of at a point when rock and roll was starting to meet the wrestling world with Cyndi Lauper and the whole thing like that. And Jake the Snake and Alice Cooper, with the Snakes, they said it would be great if Alice came in with Jake the Snake against the Honky Tonk Man and all this. It was an education. It was a different kind of theater. It was theater, but it was a different kind of theater. Because backstage, all these characters had their own personality. The Junkyard Dog, Andre the Giant, all these guys were back there like you would see back here. And they all had their own image. They all had their own thing. And these guys are athletes. I mean, when they're hitting each other, knocking each other out of the ring, they practice it, but they were athletes. They knew how to fall. They knew how to take a punch. They knew how to do everything like that. But they're really hitting each other. I mean, they're not holding back on that, because I was really watching that. And at one point I saw there were 3 or 4 little people and Andre the Giant. It was this against that. And apparently Andre the Giant was not supposed to spike one of them to the ground. And they were on chairs going, and he's going, oh, I'm sorry, giant guy. And it was comical, but I got it. I got the theater behind it. That was not rehearsed the way it was done right. I think once they get out there, there's a certain pattern to what they're supposed to do, but they're improvising too. They're also, if something happens, they go with it, So it's really good theater. I mean, it's really well done.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Adam. Alice, my question for you is in regards to Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. As I'm sure you remember, you played Freddy's dad.
Yes.
And you also did the theme song for Friday the 13th, Part 6. How did this come about for you?
I think they just naturally sort of went to me,
Oh.
They knew that I was in the horror world, in the horror genre kind of thing. And when they wanted us to do the song, I was working, I said, well, what about, we're afraid of this guy with the hockey mask, but who's behind it? The man behind the mask. Let's find out who that is, and let's see if he's actually scarier than the mask. Yeah. And that's really where that song came from. When they asked me to do the movie, I said, I'll do the movie. I said, but I don't want to play Alice Cooper. A lot of times they find a way to get Alice Cooper in the movie.
Right.
And they said, okay, how about if you played his father? And I went, oh, that's good, because his father's got to be this, this really horrible, redneck monster. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, I'll take that part. The hardest thing to do when you're making a movie is not laugh. During the most scary parts of the movie, you and the other actor are sitting there going, don't laugh. Don't make me laugh, okay? All right, don't laugh. He's going to put a straight razor through my eye in 3D. And he'd get it right about here, and he'd start laughing. And I'd go, stop it, okay? And then I would start laughing. So you have to get rid of that. Because when you see it in the movie, it's very serious.
Right.
Here comes a straight razor in your eye, and you have to react to that, you know. But when you're shooting it, the absurdity of it makes you laugh. So, I mean, if you were ever at a shoot for a horror movie, you'd see a lot of funny things going on.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
What's your name?
My name is Frank. Whoop, and I'm too close to the mic.
No, you're good.
I do have a question, but before I get to that, I just want to say School's Out in 18, two of the greatest rock anthems ever written.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also I want to say Only Women Bleed, about 40 years ahead of the Me Too.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the question that I have, and it's an apocryphal story that I heard back when I was in high school, is that about the time that you came out and were hobnobbing about there and probably in your drunken stages, I guess, out there in Hollywood, that you became friends with Jack Benny. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah. Actually, Groucho Marx was one of my best friends.
Yeah, I've seen
I
that.
got to meet Groucho, and Groucho came to the show, and it was funny how people saw our show. It was pretty undefinable in places because people couldn't say, oh, that's, and they go, well, I don't know what it is. There was theater, there was rock, there was comedy, there was horror. It was all this mixed into one thing, but it was driven by hard rock music. And Groucho saw it as vaudeville. And so Groucho grew up in vaudeville, the Marx Brothers did. So he brought all of his vaudeville friends to see the show. He would bring Jack Benny, George Burns, Mae West, Fred Astaire. They would all be on the side of the show watching Welcome to My Nightmare. And they're all just going, oh, yeah, okay, that reminds me of the good old days of the guillotine.
That had to be the coolest thing
Oh,
in the world,
my
man.
dancers, I had two girls, two guys dancers. My wife was one of the dancers. And they were professional dancers. They weren't rock dancers. They were the real deal. And Fred Astaire comes out afterwards and he goes, you kids are great. You know, I mean, come on. You can't get a better compliment than Fred Astaire, you know, telling your kids that they're great dancers.
That's about the height of anything, I think.
Oh, it was the biggest compliment they could ever get. But the other, you know, George Burns would go, yeah, I remember the guillotine back in 1925. He says, Gracie and I, you know, yeah, we worked in Toledo, I think it was. The guy was using a guillotine like that, you know. And so there was nothing new to them. And they weren't shocked. The audience was shocked. The old vaudevillians weren't shocked in the least bit. Salvador Dali comes to see the show. Now, he didn't see it as vaudeville. He saw it as surrealism. And so he looked at it and went, oh, yes, it's surrealism. You know, it was whatever perception that they came into the show looking at is what they saw. Tim Burton sees it more like, you know, he sees it and he sees it, oh, it's rock theater. You know, so everybody's got a different perception of what we do up there on stage, which is fine. I love it like that. It really can't be defined.
So
but that's why those guys showed up.
So you and Benny actually did hang some.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Jack used to say, Alice, everything I look's got your picture on it. It's ridiculous. You know? But he was dead serious. I was the only rock star in the Friars Club. So I would go into the Friars Club, and I had black leather on, hair down to here, and there's, you know, Sinatra and all the guys, you know, and they're all in tuxedos, and somebody comes over and they go, hey, Alice, Bob wants to see you. Bob? Who's Bob? And I go in, there's Bob Hope, Jerry Lewis, the President of the United States, and I walk in, you know, and Bob says, Alice, I'm pushing the ball right. You know, I said, oh, well, you got to loosen your right hand, you know, in golf, you know, you got to loosen. It showed right there that golf cut its way right through. There was a president of the United States and Alice Cooper, and we're talking about golf. You know, you would think that these two people would have nothing in common, or Bob Hope and Alice Cooper would have nothing in common. But that was the one thing that was a common denominator. And I think they saw me as vaudeville too. I think that all the comedians looked at Alice and they said, well, it's funny. It's scary, but it's funny. So I was accepted on that level.
Cool enough. Keep up the good work, man.
Thank you.
What's your name?
My name's Crystal, and you were the first concert that I ever saw. I was about 8 or 9 years old.
And you turned out fine.
Mostly. Depends on who you ask. So I was wondering what your first concert was.
It was great. I mean, I was very lucky on this one. We were just a high school band playing in any place we could play. And I went to see the Rolling Stones. But the Rolling Stones back then, you have to remember, there was no production back then. It was the real Rolling Stones with, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, 65. I was a junior in high school. And they all stood in an area about this big with maybe these kind of lights on and just played their songs. There was no production at all. It was the coolest thing I ever saw in my life, because they were the Stones. I mean, and they were the real deal. And I was 500 seats up in the thing, but it was still the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Thank you.
I think they're touring again next year too, right?
Yeah, well, they're touring again this year. We opened for them for 3 shows. In fact, we were the first band to play Churchill Downs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Stones say they were the first band, and I go, no. We opened for you, remember? We were the first band. And it rained sideways. If anybody was there, if you remember, it was raining like crazy. We get off stage, and they're laughing at us. They go, do you think it's going to stop raining because you're Mick Jagger? No. And they got soaked just like we did.
What's your name?
Hi, Alice. My name's Jasper.
Hi.
Dada is one of my favorite albums of yours.
Oh, you poor thing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think it's criminally underrated. So I was going to ask you, which of your albums do you think are underrated or maybe underappreciated?
Well, that's one of the albums that I call my blackout albums. I was at a period there when, honestly, I don't remember writing, recording, or touring with 3 albums. One of them was Special Forces, Zipper Catches Skin, and Dada. And it's funny now because I go back and I listen to those albums and I really like them. Yeah. But I don't have any memory of them.
They're fantastic.
I mean, I was pretty out there at that time. That was right before I went into the mental hospital and got sober, And so I listen to them now and I go, that song is great. Yeah. Formerly Warmer.
Yes.
May be the scariest song we ever wrote.
That's my favorite.
See, I think Formerly Warmer should be a movie. Because
Absolutely.
Who is this guy in the attic? And what do they feed him? I'm glad you said that because Formerly Warmer is still my favorite. My favorite horror song. That one and Dangerous Tonight. I thought Dangerous Tonight's probably the best vampire song. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What's
Hi,
your
Alice.
Hi.
My name's Diane.
Hi.
Before I ask my question, I want to congratulate you on your soberness and congratulate you on your marriage.
Thank you.
I've been with my husband 30 years, so I just want to congratulate. My question is, what was your favorite city that you did your concert in?
Favorite city? Oh, man. I'm from Detroit. And Detroit has always been Detroit Rock City, and it's always been probably the best hard rock city there is. The bands that came out of there, Iggy and the Stooges, the MC5, Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, Alice Cooper. There were so many. If you weren't a hard rock band in Detroit in the late 60s, they would just kill you. You couldn't be Seals and Croft and be in Detroit. It was just, all these kids were industrial kids. Their parents worked at Ford or Chrysler. And you know how, like in Los Angeles, people would go home from work, put on their black leather jackets, put on their thing, and go see Alice Cooper. In Detroit, they just come from work. That's the way they dressed. The motorcycle boots. I mean, truly a hard rock city. The only one comparable to it was probably Glasgow in Scotland. That was the same kind of audience. Drinking, fighting, and rock and roll was just part of the daily thing. And so Detroit is still got my heart as the best hard rock city. Every city is great. It depends on what you give the audience. The audience are going to react to what you give them. If you're going to be boring, oh, that's great, yeah. If you give them something on every song that makes them go, that's when you're going to get a reaction. So it depends on what the band is delivering to the audience, what the audience is going to give back. I never, ever, I tell the band, I always tell them 2 or 3 things. I say, first of all, never go out there apologetic. Don't ever go out there and say, gee, I hope you like us tonight. You go out there and you grab them by the throat and shake them for 2 hours and then let them go. I said, that's the way you attack an audience. I also tell them this, when somebody new is in the band, I go, look, I can promise you 3 things. You're going to get paid, you're going to see the world, you're going to get stitches. Because in our show, you are going to get stitches. Everybody in my band has gotten stitches at one point, you know, because my swords and stuff, they're not rubber, they're real.
Yeah, I saw you at TF Theater a couple months ago. You were awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Whose sword was it again? I remember you mentioned last time whose sword it was.
I have Errol Flynn's
Errol
sword.
Flynn, that's right.
Errol Flynn, the sword he used in Captain Blood is the sword I use on stage. So, you know, once you have that sword and Errol Flynn, it was his. Yes. And all of a sudden you are very calm, you know.
What's your name?
My name is Silas. I've been a fan of yours, Mr. Cooper, since I was 5 years old. Me and my brother was scared to death by our older brother when he bought Love It to Death. He used to play Black Juju and scare us to death when we were kids.
That song was very voodoo-ish.
Yeah. But that being said, I was the bands I listened to was you, and the influence was Elvis Presley. And I was wanting to know what your experience was when you met Elvis Presley.
Well, one of the great stories of all time is Elvis Presley knew I was in Las Vegas in 1971. Now, this is when Elvis was Elvis. Black leather Elvis. You know, Elvis. He wasn't fat. He wasn't on drugs. He was just Elvis. So he lived at the top of the Hilton Hotel in Vegas. And I get this thing saying, Elvis wants to meet you. Well, hell yeah. I'm going to go, meet Elvis. So I get to the elevator, and there's 4 people going up to see Elvis. Liza Minnelli, myself, Chubby Checker, and Linda Lovelace. That's a party. 3 of us left that night. 1 person stayed. Now, I don't know what Elvis did with Chubby Checker all night, but that's too easy. But anyway, we get in the elevator, and the first thing they do is they check you for guns, which is silly, because once you get up there, there's guns everywhere, And apparently you can't shoot Elvis with your own gun. You have to use one of his. And we're sitting there, and when they checked us, and we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, Elvis walks in. And he's, hey, man, you're that cat with a snake, right? I said, yeah. He said, I'll dig that, man, with the makeup and all that stuff. That's really cool, man. He says, Alice, where are you from? And I said, Detroit. And he said, well, come here, I want to show you something. I said, okay. So we go into the kitchen, just me and him. He opens the drawer and hands me a loaded .38. Now, being from Detroit, I start to unload it. And he goes, no, man, it's all right. I'm going to show you how to take a gun out of somebody's hand. And I went, okay. Now, at that point, the little devil comes up on my shoulder and goes, shoot him. And the angel goes, no, just wound him. And by the time I was ready to make up my mind, the gun was over here and I was on the floor. And Elvis's boot was in my neck. That's good, Elvis. That's great. Can I get up now? So, at that point, then, I said, I survived. I thought the Memphis Mafia was going to come in and shoot holes through me. I'm standing there with a loaded gun on Elvis. And he says, you want to see my most prized possession? I went, yeah. So he says, come on in here. And so we go in the bedroom, and he closes the door, and I started thinking, what is his most prized possession? I don't know this guy. He's Elvis, but his most prized possession may be something I don't want to see. He says, sit down there, man. And he opens up the drawer, and he takes out this envelope full of x-rays. And he says, I was leaving the hotel the other night. He says, and these 3 boys were drunk out there in the parking lot, and they wanted to fight me. Now, Elvis was a black belt. And so he fought the 3 guys. He held this guy's back, and he said, I broke this guy's shoulder right here, when he showed me he says, then I swung around and broke this guy's ankle with my, my leg, and he's excited about this, and I'm going, this is your prized possession? And then I realized what it was. It was the only connection he had to the outside world. He was so insulated. The colonel really wouldn't let him do anything. He always had the guys around him. He couldn't go to a movie. He couldn't go play pool. He couldn't go see another show. He was always surrounded. So this fight ended up being his connection to the outside world. And it was his most prized possession. And I said, I never want to be that big, where I'm a prisoner of my own fame, which he was. I really liked him. He was really a cool guy. Had a great sense of humor. He had no problem making fun of himself. He's like, there's something wrong with my lip, man.
Well, I want to just say you're up there with Elvis Presley.
Well, I wouldn't put myself there.
You're a legend, too, Alice.
Thank you.
And
Thank
you talk about the Rolling Stones being so great, but you are too, Alice.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But I look up to my elders, so.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So I apologize, but this has to be the last question.
Okay.
What's your name?
My name's Becca. Why do you like snakes so much?
Why do I like what?
Snakes. Why do you like snakes?
I'll tell you why. Because I was like everybody else. I was backstage one time in Florida, and this girl was standing there, and she had a very small boa constrictor wrapped around her hand. And I jumped back about 12 feet, because like everybody else, I had this natural fear of snakes. And it dawned on me right then, if I just jumped back, what would Alice do if he had a 12-foot snake on stage? The audience would go crazy. That would flip them out, because just the image of the snake alone, a small one, scared me. What would a 12-foot one do? And that's when I trained myself to not be afraid of them. Because what they do is this, a lot of people don't realize this, is that snakes smell adrenaline, like a dog does. If you walk into a room and you see a snake and you go like that, you just let off adrenaline and they can smell it. What do? They go on the defense. If you walk right in and pick the snake up and put it around your neck, you've got no problem at all. No, I'm not talking about a rattlesnake or a cobra. I'm talking about like a constrictor. They're absolutely fairly harmless. If you show fear, they're going to show fear. So they're pretty much deaf. They really, their whole thing is their sense of smell. And they don't see very well. So if you walk in and you are smelling like fear, they're going to, of course, go, okay, I'm afraid of that. They're just as afraid as you are. So you have to train yourself to don't pick up a rattler, okay? Because they're not fun at all. But usually a regular snake is not going to do anything.
So before we wrap things up, let's talk about what you have coming up.
Oh my gosh, we got the Christmas pudding show coming up with the Vampires and who else? Blue Oyster Cult, Sebastian Bach, Gretchen Wilson, Larry the Cable Guy is our MC that night, who was a lot of fun. Bisto Blanco is going to be there. And it's a charity. I have a thing called Solid Rock Foundation, which any teenager can come in and learn any instrument or dance or art or anything, all free. And we have to fund it, so we do the Christmas pudding. And the great thing about the pudding is, if it's a Christmas party, and you were at a Christmas party, and somebody said, okay, everybody has to get up and do something. Okay? It's that, except we have a stage. So I try to put people like Pat Boone and Rob Zombie together. I put people that do not belong together on stage at all. I had Glenn Campbell and Ted Nugent together. And it's really fun to see what they're going to do. And they just find something, they find a Chuck Berry song or something like that to do. So in this thing, we do that every year. And then I do a big golf tournament also to fund Solid Rock. And that's another one where most of the golfers are from bands. One guy's in Kiss, one guy's in The Doors, one guy's in that. And we get up and we do a whole show that night. So, but Solid Rock's been going 20 years now. We get 100 kids a day in there. And it's all free. And we just tell them, what it does, it pulls kids out of gangs, it gets kids that were basically going to be in gangs, going to be selling meth, going to be this. Now they get interested more in playing guitar or in art or in dance or in something else. That was something they didn't have before. That was an opportunity they didn't have until this place opened. So we're very happy with it, yeah.
And new album, new tour, possibly, Alice?
4 albums coming out.
Wow.
The live one's already out. The Alice Cooper live album just came out from Paris, and I'm very happy with that album. Then there's a studio album coming out. And then there's a live Vampires album coming out from Switzerland, and a studio Vampire coming out next year. So a lot of albums coming out next year, and the Vampire album is really interesting. I think Johnny and I wrote a lot of the songs on it, and really good stuff. I mean, really good stuff.
Well, I know we're all looking forward to that, right, guys?
Yeah.